Evil is back. The Drool King Lotor has returned with a dark energy that can destroy the galaxy. Our only hope? The Voltron Force, a team of 5 heroic pilots that control 5 awesome robot lions. When Lotor's monstrous road beasts attack, the lions come together to form Voltron, defender of the universe.
Oh! Let's Voltron! Oh! Let's Voltron! Oh! Let's Voltron!
Welcome, Voltron fans. This is Marc Morell, your host for Let's Voltron, the official Voltron podcast. We're here for another podcast episode review from Voltron Force for Dradin, baby Dradin. And then we also want to do our review of San Diego Comic-Con, which we haven't had a chance to do yet. So I'll bring on my co-host, Greg Tyler. Welcome, Greg.
Mark, great to see you as always, and great to see our returning guest as always, and great to be back on Let's Voltron, the official Voltron podcast. So let's get this party started.
Yeah, so of course we're welcoming back Shannon Muir. Welcome, Shannon.
Glad to be back as always. Good to see both of you.
Good to see you.
At the start of the year, I say finally because for various reasons, the lockdown and other things being among them, the publisher that I've worked with for putting out some of my short stories put out my first novella. The name is a little bit of a mouthful because the characters were licensed from another pulp writer where the publisher got the license to this individual's characters from their estate. And the title is Charles Bachman Presents Doc and Sally in The Death of Buddy Turner.
All
That
right.
came out in January. I appeared in public for the first time to sell books. Didn't sell any, but it was good to be able to go out and see people and get used to doing stuff again at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books. That was back in April. I am now in my second year of school at San Jose State University, still working on library and information systems. There's been so much going on for that. This summer, it tied into that, I went to the California Library Association conference in Sacramento on a travel grant. And as part of that, I had to help work in the school's booth down in the exhibitor hall. And the director of the school asked me, because I volunteered to help them tear down. My flight wasn't leaving till much later. He said, we need a couple of student ambassadors to go to the American Library Conference in Chicago. And so I and one other person at the end of the same month, that June was busy, made my first trip ever to Chicago.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely enjoyed it because we were there on the exhibitor passes, had to be there a couple days early, only put in a couple hours a day for setup, went out and saw museums, was right down the street from the historic home of Chess Records. And as somebody who grew up listening to blues with my dad, and I worked at a 10,000 watt student-led jazz station when I was in college, which was part of the influence for doing the Doc and Sally book, getting to see the little Chess Records building was a lot of fun too.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of August, the school announced that they are going to cease programming at the end of the year. My alma mater, Eastern Washington University in Cheney, my adopted hometown, has had a radio station for 73 years. KWU, as the community knows it, has been a jazz station since the early 80s, not that many years before I actually started attending school. I worked there. I did a show called Women of Jazz there that I originated, that they kept on the air for many years. That was a bit of a surprise, to be an understatement. And I won't ramble at length, but the end result was I actually ended up talking to a reporter from the Spokesman Review.
Wow.
Right before Labor Day, and they have a quote of mine in the article that they did on it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that affects the community. So, and then of course the other thing in between all that is I was at San Diego Comic-Con where I saw Mark and Kim, and throw it back at you, Mark.
Yeah, and of course we saw Kevin. So it was wonderful because it was a totally different Comic-Con, wasn't it? With
Oh yeah.
not having all those actors, and a lot of the panels and everything had either been diminished to just showing clips or episodes, and not having Q&As or not having them at all. It was just weird. So, for the first time with all those strikes going on, and that was unusual.
As someone who, I think my first San Diego Comic-Con, I should know this. It was the year I moved here. 1996, pre-Twilight.
Okay.
When everybody tells you Twilight changed everything, they're not joking.
Mm-hmm.
Though this is now on a larger scale with more programming, this was closer to what I remember when I started. Kevin, my husband Kevin, has gone much more years than I, and of course his stories, he'll tell me how it being in a whole different building and all that. But yeah, you experienced something closer to what I first remember.
Yeah, and we had never experienced anything like that at San Diego Comic-Con because of all the years we've been there. It's always been a very big spectacle, studio driven, and just TV shows, movies, everything takes over. And this year, kind of the comics took over, which was a really pleasant change. It was really nice.
Yeah. And what was different for me is that, and I didn't know this until just a couple years ago, is that the San Diego Public Library's main branch is just a few blocks from the convention center. And they've always offered programming that's open. It's open to the public, but they tie it in with Comic-Con. That's all related to how comics and graphic novels, and tying it into libraries. And there was one day that was devoted to publishers, one day to librarians, one day to educators. And so I had already planned to kind of go back and forth anyway. So what ended up happening is I spent the majority of the time at the library, and then I would come over to the convention center for select panels. Well, my husband Kevin spent all his time at the convention center. So I guess in a way it was good, since I was already planning to do something different. It wasn't as much of a drastic change for me as it might otherwise have been. I might have gone, oh, what am I missing out on the other side? I didn't feel that way, which I don't know if that's good or bad.
We obviously want to talk about this from a Voltron perspective, right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're a Voltron fan and you went to San Diego Comic-Con this year, there were a couple things on the floor that you wanted to check out, but I want to start with a panel that Shannon and Kevin and Kim and I attended on Saturday that was really nice, and a complete 180 from what I would normally do. But at the Marriott Marquis, they typically have a lot of these anime viewing rooms, similar to the cartoon viewing room that they have at Volcon. And they would just show these things, and they would be on a schedule and everything, and it's all kinds of anime. And typically I would go over there to watch Star Blazers, Space Battleship Yamato, 2199. We saw a couple episodes there. And the rooms that they have for that now think twice that big. And they had this panel for Voltus 5 because they're having a live action movie. And so Voltus 5, way back from I guess that was the 70s or 80s. Do you remember when that was?
1976.
76.
It actually would have aired when I lived in Japan. Obviously, I didn't see it. I was too young. But that's why I was familiar with it. And the minute I heard they were going to be there and they were going to be doing their setup, which is both, they have a live action movie they did that I guess they're releasing of the origin, but it's the origin episodes of the entire TV series, which is produced and has aired over there. And I'm like, I have to see what they did. I have to see what the reaction is. And what I found striking was the enthusiasm that they have there in the Philippines for Voltus 5 this many years later is
Mhm.
like the enthusiasm we have for growing up with Voltron.
Right.
And they didn't, and it's not that they saw 3 or 4 different iterations till they've seen the live action version that was completely produced in the Philippines, may I add.
Hmm.
It's solely from that single anime in the 70s.
Right. So imagine the room is packed. The line was way too long. Some people couldn't get in. And while they were waiting for the panel to start, some of the people on the panel, including the actors, knew that there were people outside that weren't going to be able to see the panel. And that upset them. They wanted everybody to be able to see this. So they actually went outside into the hallway and they started hugging people and greeting people and doing autographs and all that kind of stuff before the panel started,
Because
which
we
was
had
really
about
nice.
10 minutes in advance, I think. And they just were like, I was like, what are they doing? And then when they told us, I was like, you folks are amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really cool. And so we got to see, basically a preview of what this movie would be like. And it's really cool. And it's really cool to see, on the large scale like that. And it's completely produced in the Philippines, and it's going to be shown on their major network. What is that? GMA?
GMA, yeah.
Yeah. So
How authentic does it look to the original anime? Is it heavily restyled, or is it a very close tribute? How's that work?
Based on what I've seen, I haven't actually finished Voltus 5 yet. We've been watching it subtitled on, I think it's Tubi that has it right now, actually. It shot for shot, a lot of it.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, we were
Huh.
based on the excerpts that ran that are from the first couple episodes, which we had seen. Kevin and I had gotten to by that point. We're like, we know that shot. That's the exact camera angle. Dang.
mhm.
So yeah,
That's
that's how
impressive.
faithful they are to the property. They love this property.
Mhm.
That's impressive.
And they also see this as a precursor to many other things happening on that network in Philippines. So they also showed a preview of something else that they had going on from that network as well. So that was nice to see.
What I found also interesting, Mark, was when they were getting into the history of how they wound up getting this made. It had a very similar turbulent road that doing anything in Voltron live action has had. Except in their case, the biggest hangup was the Philippines didn't have the technology yet, everybody kept saying. And finally, certain people who believed enough kept pressing and kept figuring out where to find the people to invest in making sizzle reels and the time and to show that they could do it. And once they proved that they could, they did it.
Yeah,
But I think it was a 10-year journey for them too, if I remember right.
Yeah, and they were just so proud to be able to debut this to the world, basically at San Diego Comic-Con for the first time. And they had never had something from the Philippines be debuted at San Diego Comic-Con before. So it was almost like historical for us to be there.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. So I am looking forward to checking more of that out if we're able to see that on anything else, I don't know where it would be available, like YouTube or something else. I have no idea.
Because I do know when they asked, somebody from the audience asked if there were any what level of international rights in the works. And they honestly, I mean, this is the level of people they had there. They had people from the production crew, and they had the CEO of the network on the panel. And I got the impression, Mark, watching them, they're like, it hadn't even dawned on them. They were just like, I don't know where they're going to go from there, but I hope many good things all the way around.
Right. So of course, the network probably is one of the biggest investors in those programs.
Yeah.
So they have a big stake in it, and of course they're very proud of what they were able to put on screen. So, I mean, the actors were proud of it, the crew was proud of it, and the people from the network were proud of it. So that was really nice to see. So in going from that, we also got a chance to see a couple things on the floor that were Voltron related. You see this little guy right here? This is the Voltron necklace from Han Cholo. So you can see it's about that size.
What, about an inch and a half tall?
Yeah,
It's a
maybe
kind of
2
a
inches.
pewter
Right.
looking,
Yeah.
it's like a pewter rendition of the original Lion Voltron. Cool.
Right. Right. It's very nice. I like it. It's got some heft to it, And so they had those as their exclusive for San Diego Comic-Con. So we got to say hi to Brandon again, and he says hi.
Awesome.
And then at the Bondi booth, there was this other thing you might recognize.
Yes. Is that the three-way robo do, however that's pronounced?
The 031.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the metallic version, right?
right.
Yeah, they put that they put some of those on Voltron.com, the Voltron store, and they sold out very quickly.
Right. And at the time that it was at San Diego, though, those were the only ones available because they were going to introduce them at a Hong Kong convention. So we got our first crack at it at San Diego.
Nice.
So we were happy about that. And then, like you said, they've been available around here, especially on store.voltron.com. We also have heard some rumblings about other things that may be available for Voltron. But as of yet, after checking with Web, we haven't confirmed the licensing on them yet. So I know you guys had seen something mentioned. I think it was like a plastic kit that would assemble into the lines, which could assemble into Voltron.
Mhm.
And as of right now, I don't have confirmation that it's actually legit yet. As
Yeah,
a
and some
license
photos had, yeah, and photos had also been shared of a couple different higher end Voltron Legendary Defender Voltron combiners as well. So, but again, nothing confirmed. But they do look really awesome. So hopefully those will come to pass.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward on getting confirmation. So we can talk about it. So that was the main thrust of Voltron. Of course, there's still some artists in Artist Alley that still do some Voltron stuff, and there's some people that have their booths around the floor and stuff like that that still do Voltron stuff. But for the most part, yeah, you're not going to see anything new Voltron wise at San Diego Comic-Con, especially panel wise, until there's actual real stuff going on with that movie. But of course, nothing is going on right now as long as there's strikes in place.
Yeah,
Mhm.
hopefully.
Does anybody think these strikes would have gone this long?
I think they're going to go as long as they need to go for the unions and the producers to come up with agreements that work for everybody. We've seen writers and various other motion picture and television industry strikes last for quite a while. So I don't think this is unheard of. What do you think, Shannon?
Well, to your point, yeah, I mean, I've lived here and I've seen a few of them. It's rare that multiple coincide, and I think that's
Right.
kind of what's unique about here. Is most of the time that I've been here, it's been one union or a different union having to work out something. But the fact that you have two of them that are kind of have a certain level of dependence on each other puts a lot of wrinkles into it. And I'm certainly not an expert in that. I don't fully belong to either guild. At one point through animation, I know that I've mentioned that I had an associate status with the WGA, but they've restructured to a point where I'm not even sure where that stands. There's a certain level that you're in on when you have a full membership. So I do have to disclose that I've had attachment to WGA in the past, but right now, as far as what's going on, I know nothing.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's something that's probably gonna keep things at bay for a while, like scheduled things that might get pushed off.
Yep.
So,
But they've got to do what they've got to do, you know. And I for one support all of the strikers, and I hope I hope a satisfactory resolution comes to each of those strikes, each of those contract negotiations in the not too distant future.
right. So we don't know anything about any Voltron movie yet right now.
Nope.
So we do have still some episodes from Voltron Force though that we've been reviewing, and hopefully most of you have been caught up on that. So we are now getting into Dradin Baby Dradin. So why don't we get started on that?
All right,
Like a
here we
plan.
go. Yeah, so this is the 20th episode of Voltron Force, so 6 more to go after this one. Production number 120. It originally aired March 14th, 2012. Story was by Todd Garfield and Jeremy Corey. Written by Daniel Powell, who had previously written the episode Rogue Trip. So, two stories that kind of have a little bit of an interesting similarity to them, and that both involve our heroes leaving the planet Eris and going to a planet that we don't get to see all that often. Directed by John Delaney, and the voice cast, all the usuals. Ashley Bell as Allura, although many of them are doing multiple voices.
Yeah.
Doron Bell Jr. returns as Vince. Shannon Chen Kent plays Larmina. Andrew Francis does at least triple duty. He's credited as doing Lance, Todd, and Boss Dread. And his Boss Dread is actually all three of those voices are so distinct from one another. He does a remarkable job. Giles Panton plays Keith. Ty Olson does at least double duty. He's credited as Hunk and the employee, who I'm assuming is the guy who works at the electronics store. Vincent Tong does double duty, at least as Daniel and the RoboCab robot. He's called the Pedicab robot in the credits, but they always call it a RoboCab in the actual episode. Sam Vincent does double duty as Pidge and the so-called grease monkey who works at the garage. And then Gary Chalk does double duty for the first time, I think, in Voltron Force, playing Manset and a bouncer. Actually, he had played Wade and Manset in the very earliest episodes, but he's playing a new secondary character in this one. So that is it.
That was cool.
The summary of the teaser is very straightforward. Vince shows the rest of the Voltron Force his Voltron, I guess you could say, music video.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in a host of ways. It features the theme from the Voltron Defender of the Universe, which this show by this point had already repurposed into the Voltron formation sequence music as early as the 13th episode, I believe.
Right.
But what I found kind of interesting is that at least 2 shots, it seems like a montage largely of clips from previous episodes mixed together, showing the different characters going to the lions doing their thing, Voltron using a bunch of different weapons. But at least 2 shots are brand new for this sequence. There's a shot where Larmina orders the forming of the Energy Star, and one where she has them form the Blazing Katana. And each of these is unique because previously we had, this is the last time we see these weapons, and they had only previously been seen in one episode, the episode Brains, and the weapons were formed on the planet Balto. And here we see them formed in a different way. And also, Voltron forms 2 Blazing Katana, whereas previously Voltron had formed 1 and was fighting with the Blazing Sword and 1 katana. So there's a unique footage, but they didn't have to do that. I'm kind of surprised they went there. So I mean, it could have been a total money saver for this whole sequence.
Did it bother you at all that Larmina was doing the Energy Star when you kind of thought it should be Pidge?
No, because she had them used in the prior story as well.
Okay.
So, I mean, they were her thing, even regardless of who was the center. Those were weapons that she had called out previously. But yeah. The music video finishes, and one thing that's really interesting is they had all this crazy. The music is insane. It's just this mixture of the '80s theme and a bunch of other stuff thrown in. It's clearly a DJ run amok here. And what's really fun is that they play through the main Voltron theme 2 or 3 times, and by the last go around, it's playing at a higher, like an octave higher, or at least a half octave higher. I'm not a musical expert than it was ever played in the original show. So it was actually modified, because all they have is the original recordings. It's not like they have the individual instrument tracks, I'm assuming, lying around at World Events Productions. So they must have run it through a sound editor to lift it up another half octave or full octave perhaps from its regular tone, and it's pretty fun. But it winds up, the video ends. Vince asks everyone what they think, and Allura says, "I thought the music was a bit much," and then Vince says, "Everyone's a critic." The script has a few extra lines, which are kind of interesting. Did you want to comment on those, Mark? Or
Sure, absolutely. At one point, Lance said, "Does my hair really look like that? Why didn't you guys tell me?" And then Pidge said, "The middle part seemed to drag a little." And Hunk says, "I know the camera's supposed to add 10 pounds, but yikes."
so anyway, I think it was better that they kept it short and sweet. But
Yeah.
it was fun.
For me, when I first saw it, I remember this being very jarring because I'm like, did they change the opening credits? Are they doing something? What it reminds me of there was one episode, speaking of another 80s series, which was Gem, and they did something like this kind of thing, where from beat one, the credits and everything it was leading up to fell off, and then they had to have them interrupted in a way where a character came into camera and set us up to realize that was part of the whole plot. And so my brain immediately went, what are they setting us up for? Why are they changing the credits? I didn't realize it was just going to be Vince's music video.
Mm-hmm.
So, but especially knowing how it pays off, it didn't bother me by the time we got to the end of it. But I didn't know what was coming next until we were at the end of the sequence.
So here we are today in the day and age where everybody can edit their own videos all the time, and you can make a fan video of anything Voltron these days. But it seemed like when you pull back and you see Vince, that was like his fan video of Voltron Force.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, I got a kick out of it too. So let's go ahead and jump into Act 1. And again, just touching on the high points, not doing a complete every single, time we flash from one setting to another. But the summary here is basically Manset, who we've seen all the way back since the very first episode. He invites the Voltron Force to spend the weekend at the Leisure Drome on Dradin. And Lance is responding as if he might have some inkling that Manset was going to call. But anyway, Vince is super excited because the Leisure Drome on the planet Dradin is hosting SciCon, as in SCI, Science Con, and he wants to premiere his Voltron documentary there. So the video that we saw was part of a documentary, whether it was the lead in or the lead out, we don't yet know. But that's basically the thing, and so he's excited. However, Manset ruins his plans by saying the invitation is only for the pilots and not for the cadets. So the pilots leave for Dradin and the Lions, and very soon afterward, the cadets decide they're going to go too. So they fly to Dradin in Awesometron. And I think this is a really nice way to remind the viewer that Awesometron is around. It's going to be needed in a very, very soon to be reviewed episode. So it's nice to remind folks that it's still there. So anyway, on Dradin, there's a bouncer, again voiced by Gary Chalk, which is pretty fun, who refuses to let the cadets into the Leisure Drome because they're not on the list and they don't have lions to prove they're part of the Voltron Force.
Number one, before they form Awesometron, Daniel yells out, "Let's Voltron." Okay.
Yeah,
We
that's
we have
important.
we have to identify anytime they say "Let's Voltron." Okay.
There we go. Yeah.
All right. And then of course they say Awesometron blast off, which wasn't really part of the original script.
Oh, okay.
Huh.
And I think that's important because maybe not everybody remembers it's called Awesometron, or say this was your first time ever watching this show with this episode. Now you know that thing's called Awesometron.
All right.
Okay.
Glad you called that out.
When the cadets get there for the first time and they're talking to the bouncer, right before you see them pan over to the cadets on the left, you got to look at it quick because it only happens for 2 seconds or so. But there's Voltron Girl.
Yes.
There's the little girl that was dressed up as Voltron that we saw in pictures, and then all of a sudden she's on Voltron Force. How did that happen?
Yeah. So for folks who are aware, as Mark just mentioned, there had been photos that went around on the internet in the years, just a few years leading up to the premiere of Voltron Force, showing a young girl dressed in a very cleverly made costume of Voltron from Defender of the Universe. And this was a kind of a tip of the hat on the part of the Voltron Force folks to that girl. And that's just neat to see.
Yeah, that was amazing.
What did you think of that, Shannon?
I love it when they do that. I mean,
Yeah,
it's some of the other shows that I worked on over the years. The nickname for it is a process called Tekkerization, basically. I forgot where that originates from, though. Wish I remember. But sometimes there will be things put into various episodes of a show, like the way a shop might be named that people go into. Could be, and we talked about it before, I think, even on this show, where sometimes character names or names of things, objects they talk about, go back to being a slight change on the name of somebody who's on the cast and crew. In this case, the little girl wasn't on the cast and crew, but she made such an impact on so many people. It's like, we want to pay, homage to that fandom and that dedication, so we will put it here.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah. And it was the perfect place for it because, man, Dradin is so colorful and so, spectacular, and now you've got Voltron Girl there too. That just makes it even more special. So
Yeah, and it works because there's a convention going on. So
Right.
On that level, it makes sense that somebody would be cosplaying as Voltron. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, on Dradin, the cadets can't get into the Leisure Drome, so they can't go to SciCon, and they meet someone named Todd. And Todd had offered earlier to help the Voltron Force pilots valet park the Lions, and they decided to self-park instead. So this is Todd. He's offering to get the cadets into the Leisure Drome to sneak them in exchange for a flight in the Black Lion. And surprisingly, given the nature of the cadets, it's Vince who jumps at the chance to do this. He's so looking forward to going to SciCon that he is all about, going against going against the strict regs and rules and having this happen. So that's pretty fun.
I guess he needed his turn to break him, because usually it's Daniel or Lormina. like,
Yep.
okay, if there was something that would motivate him, that's
Yep.
probably it.
So Manset shows the Voltron Force pilots around the Leisure Drome with all these various fun things that they can do. And after he finishes that up, a militarized vehicle shows up, and two drool goons jump out, grab Manset, pull him into the vehicle, and off it goes. Apparently, there's a character named Boss Dread who wants a word with Manset. And so Keith and Lance very quickly, we don't see this actual process, they very quickly rent two hover cycles and pursue Dread's his military limo, I guess you could call it. And meanwhile, Allura Pigeon Hunk decide to go back into the Leisure Drome to get a burger. Just as they go back inside, we see the Black Lion galloping down the street and turning a corner.
Yeah,
And that's basically the end of Act One.
right.
Thoughts of Act One?
So we already have the cadets breaking the rule of they were supposed to stay back at the castle.
Yeah, in fact, Pidge said they all the their contact info was on the fridge, and we got to see the fridge in castle control for the first and only time. They were told to check the various systems every so often and all that stuff. So yeah, they were told to stay back.
And of course, Larmina says to them, we're not really staying here, are we? We're going, aren't we? Yes, of course we are. But then, they get there, and now Vince is the one that gets them into even more trouble by using the Black Lion to help somebody get a joyride. And we all know how that ends in the typical trope of people taking joyrides in the middle of a movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
It never seems to go well.
No.
But I thought the fact that they've already broken a couple of rules already just means the cadets are really going to be in for it.
Yeah. And I should point out that Manset actually owns the Leisure Drome. So he's made a lot of money. We know from past episodes that he's been a smuggler, and of course he's been an on and off ally of the Voltron Force and the Den. And so apparently he's had enough money that he's made through various means that he now has his own casino. And he often refers to Dradin as his planet. I don't know that it's really his, or it's just the place where his casino leisure place is. But regardless, it's impressive. I'll just have one question lingering at the end of Act One. I frankly, I like the lighter tone of Act One. I think it's pretty fun. But it kind of bugs me that Pidge, Hunk, and Allura just kind of go, we're just gonna go eat a burger, while their longtime ally has been abducted by a drool. They have no clue where the drools are from or who's supporting them, who's really calling the shots, and Keith and Lance have just zipped off in a couple of hover cycles. Oh well, let's have a burger.
I think it means they have all the faith in the world that Lance and Keith got this one. We'll just stay back here. There's really not much more we can do than they could do, and we'll just let them take care of it. But I think it also might have to do with the fact that Keith has always had, and Lance maybe, have always had a stronger relationship with Manset, and the rest of them haven't. And maybe they even think that maybe Manset's smuggling is not favorable to them.
I mean, more importantly, it gets those characters doing something, whatever it is, so that we could focus on the more the lighter aspects of the story. With Keith and Lance doing their thing and the cadets doing their thing.
What do you think, Shannon?
Well, I think you've already pointed out a lot of the thoughts that I've had on it. I do have to admit that this one is probably a harder episode for me to connect with because lightness and humor are not always my thing. We haven't broken some of the scenes down in detail, but there were I think we'll get to some of them later, though. At times, the humor in this scene, the burger is kind of an example of that, but it's not the biggest one, where I can suspend my disbelief for humor if there's at least some logical sense to it. But there's a couple of things that show up throughout this episode that are just such a disconnect that it pulls me out of wanting to stay engaged with it.
Mm.
But that's me. And I'm willing to admit I'm probably the minority with that.
Fair enough.
So did we really believe, like they were saying at the beginning of this, that they were actually going to be on a vacation and nothing was going to go wrong?
In an adventure series like Voltron, of course not.
No,
Exactly.
no. There's too much going on in the universe.
All right, Act 2. As Keith and Lance pursue Dred's limo, the cadets take Todd on that joyride in the Black Lion. And a line that was added in the finished episode that was not featured in the script copy that we have is Todd yelling, "My life suddenly has meaning," which is kind of fun.
Did you see what they wrote in the script about what happens on that when you see the lion jumping over and sort of leaps in slow-mo over the one building?
Mm-hmm.
Did you see in the script there that it's really a pop culture reference to Ferris Bueller's Day Off when the parking attendants take the Ferrari on a joyride?
Yeah.
And in that movie,
a bit of a stretch of a reference, but yeah.
right. But in that movie, when they show the one scene in slow-mo, they're playing the Star Wars theme. I thought that was pretty cool when I watched that for the first time on Ferris Bueller's. So
yeah.
So I did get the sense of that.
Do you find it interesting the parking attendant's name is Todd? Like Todd Garfield?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's intentional, but I guess how many times have you said that now?
That's a good point.
I've always wondered that because, you know, in VLD, they used their own names quite a bit, you know.
Oh, yeah, they laid it on pretty thick.
But I didn't know if they did that in Voltron Force or not, but it seems like maybe there's a little bit of that in Voltron Force too.
Yeah. So Keith, in the pursuit, Keith and Lance's rented hover cycles are destroyed, both of them in short order. Keith and Lance wind up on the roof of the limo, and they open it up with Keith's Voltcom swords. They jump in. Dred holds Manset at gunpoint, but very soon after that, he jumps out of the vehicle and onto a goon's hover cycle. And then Keith and Lance have to take control of the vehicle and return it to the Leisure Drome. So a couple things are pretty interesting here. One is, I mean, they flat out say it in the story. Dred is not a goon of Lotor. We don't know where he's from just yet. But Keith and Lance make the assumption that he's working for Lotor. And he basically says, you know, you making an assumption could get you hurt, which, okay, that's cool. But I find it kind of interesting and kind of cool that we're seeing Drools who aren't allied with Lotor. I mean, that alone is kind of a neat thing. I mean, Drools in this show they're more or less carbon copies of one another. They follow Lotor and Mayhawks to one degree or another. Other than Cossack, who you see just a handful of times in this show, the Drools are they're not really that distinguishable from each other. So this is kind of cool.
So there's a subsection of the Drool Empire that may not really want to be a part of the Drool Empire.
Yeah, which is pretty neat. So, and what's also interesting is that there are a couple of lines in the script that are reversed from what they are in the finished episode, and they kind of give a different. They describe the action a little differently.
In the original script, he says, "Let's head back to the Leisure Drome. I'll explain everything from the safety of the hotel." And then he says, "Oh, also, someone should probably take the wheel now."
But, so basically, Keith and Lance are looking at each other, and they just begin to dive into the front seat. So we leave it a moment of jeopardy. Whereas in the finished episode, Manset says his line about taking the wheel a little bit earlier, and we see Lance and Keith, jump into the seat, and then they cut to a
As they're
wide shot
driving
of the
back, I
vehicle
think.
driving. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it suggests that they've taken control pretty quickly and easily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So moving on from that, the joyride is over in Black Lion, and Todd tells the cadets to park in an alley and then to meet him at the back kitchen entrance where Todd will sneak them into the leisure drome. We go back to our hero, the pilots, and Manset confesses to them that he had really invited them to Dradin so that they could help him fight back Boss Dread and the Syndicate, which is this, this gang or this organized crime group that Boss Dread runs.
It's like the Drool Mafia.
Yeah, exactly. The Voltron Force actually agrees to help him out as long as Manset goes fully legit afterwards. So no more smuggling. Apparently, he had received some illegal weapons that the Syndicate was supposed to get, and so they got ticked off at him, and that sort of kicked off this feud between the Syndicate and Manset, and presumably the other casino owners on Dradin. So that's going on. Shortly afterward, Boss Dread and some goons arrive with laser guns and Drool tanks, and they fire on the leisure drone from outside. We go back to the cadets, and they realize Todd has dumped them. They've been waiting outside the back kitchen entrance, and not only has Todd dumped them, but a cook comes out and dumps a Rougeon seafood chowder on Vince, and a big old pot of it. And after it lands on him, it's Daniel who sticks his finger in the goo on Vince's head, tastes it, and said, "A Rougeon seafood chowder." And the first thing I think is, this is being dumped out for a reason. Why are you eating it?
Yep. Me too.
Yeah. And then we wrap up with the Voltron Force pilots going to self-parking where the Lions supposedly are. And there's an added line to make it really clear what's happening because it's not explicitly spelled out in dialogue in the script. Keith says, "Let's get these Lions out of self-parking," to explain what they're doing. They find that Black Lion isn't there. And at the same time, the cadets also discover that the Black Lion isn't in the alley where they had parked it. So we end Act 2 with the Black Lion having disappeared, and the pilots and cadets are both aware.
Yeah, they had changed the script a little bit because both Keith and Larmina said it at the same time, and you see them both on the screen at the same time. They had said it's gone, but instead of it's, in the show they say Black Lion's gone.
Yeah.
So
that's a good, and I think that helps clarify things as well, because at least as staged, you don't see any lions in self-parking.
That's
which
true.
is another one of those, let's save a few bucks by not showing the other 4 lions. And just clarify it in dialogue. They didn't have to stage the 4 CG models of the lion in that shot, which
exactly. That would have been an expensive shot.
Yep. So
especially when you're getting down to those final few and you know what you need for the other storylines. You're like, okay, where can we cut corners so that the finale will be what we want? Hey, maybe if we do this here.
Yep. And the dialogue, those dialogue changes do help to clarify the action when you can't actually see the lions. So, and that's Act 2. Thoughts about Act 2?
We haven't even gotten to the real stuff yet. I mean, they got Manset back. That's good. So now they don't feel guilty about eating their hamburgers, right?
Right. Yeah. Good for those guys.
I think Act 2 has the best pacing of the 3 acts, but you're right that we're only as far back as getting Manset back. From an overall episode pacing, this one felt like one of the slowest ones, and it may be again because there's so many jokes that are peppered throughout it. The joke versus action feel, again, I can be in the minority and this is okay. But I just felt like, shouldn't we be farther along than we are?
Yeah.
But overall, it's a good story.
Yeah, I'm beginning to feel the cost of the joyride is coming.
Yep. All right, well let's figure out what that cost is. So the third act begins. The cadets find drag marks on the street in the alley that they've expected to find the black lion in. They surmise that the black lion must have been towed because they wouldn't have the whoever took it wouldn't have been able to start the lion anyway without a key or a Voltcom. So the cadets go following the drag marks to try to find the black lion.
I mean, I know they waited a few minutes before they were around, but they were around back and everything, but they didn't hear a giant lion being dragged somewhere. You'd think that would kind of reverberate. This is
Yeah.
where I said the suspension of disbelief kind of.
And this I would chalk up to maybe if the show had had some walla or some ambient noise to simulate how noisy a planet like this part of the planet would have been with all the action, it would have helped to drown out that sound. But
Right.
they just don't have it in this episode. Um,
That wouldn't
but
have
yeah,
been hard to do from a sound design perspective. That would have been easy enough to do. They did it at the beginning with that big trailer that he was showing at the beginning with all that noise.
oh yeah, yeah. That's true. But I mean, then you'd have to keep that kind of stuff up while you have a bunch of action going on. And I
Mhm.
think the sound mix, keeping it so that the action is clear amidst the chaos, would have been would have been a little bit of a challenge on the production conditions they probably were under. But yeah. But yeah, I totally agree. It kind of heard that thing. It's kind of big.
Mhm.
Yeah, so the other four lions, yay, Pidge, Hunk, and Allura finally popped out of the leisure drome. They're in their lions, and they're engaging Dred's forces, and the battle begins to damage bits and parts of Manset's leisure drome, and he's really devastated by it, of course. But a lot of the areas that he calls out as getting blown away are just hilarious, and I can't think of them offhand, but
The diamond encrusted bowling lanes is the all you can eat buffet
Yeah.
and the statue of himself.
Yes.
yeah.
Do you know that reminded me of Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl. So it reminded me of Jack Sparrow when he's locked in the ship and they're firing cannonballs at the Black Pearl and he's saying, "Stop putting holes in my ship." It reminded me of what Manset was yelling there.
Oh, that's funny. So Keith goes to rent a hovercycle, and the attendant says that two guys had already taken his hovercycles. It turns out in the script, this attendant was probably the script implies that we had seen him earlier in the episode, but it doesn't play out that way in the finished episode. But instead of getting hovercycles, Keith has to rent a robocab. It's called a pedicab, PEDI cab in the script, and it's a 30 credit rental. So he walks out to this little cab. It's got this 1950s kind of looking robot there sitting behind the wheel, and it's let's just say its speech recognition software is not so hot.
Yeah,
Um,
sometimes it reminds me of Alexa or Siri. Sorry, I didn't understand what you just said.
My first thought with this, the first thing I thought when I saw this was from Total Recall. Thanks for writing Johnny Cab.
Yeah.
But I love that movie. But anyway, so in the next scene, the cadets have followed the drag marks to a store which the script calls. It's not explicitly spelled out in the finished episode because they use alien writing all over the place. But in the script, it's called Stereo Galaxy, and it's also described as being a futuristic circuit city. And how dated is that reference?
Now, yeah.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
Oh, rest
About
in
Even
peace,
then,
Circuit
I'm not
City.
sure how many of them were still around.
Yeah, fair point. The tracks end in front of the store, and an employee tells the cadets where the direction in which its towing rig had begun to pull it, and the cadets run off. And right afterward, Keith pulls up in the RoboCab and begins to ask the employee about the Black Lion. Also, a quick shot of the lions fighting Boss Dred's forces, Then we go back to a futuristic body shop where a mechanic tells the cadets where the Black Lion went next because it's not there either. The cadets run off, and Keith's RoboCab arrives right on the heels of the cadets again. But neither the cadets nor Keith have seen the other. So the cadets haven't noticed Keith, and Keith has not noticed them. So the Lion Boss Dread battle continues further, and then we next see the cadets at a garage where the cadets and Keith recover the Black Lion in a pretty funny way. You want to go into the gory details, either of you?
Is there anything that's different in those beats script wise than what we saw, or was that pretty accurate to what you have in front of you?
Pretty close. There are just a handful of additional lines or removed lines. There's really not a lot of difference.
Yeah, I mean, they added a couple of lines for Keith where he just says hi there. That wasn't in the script. Yeah, but other than that, the script's pretty spot on.
Yeah, that's one of the nuggets I always like every time I listen or interact on one of these. As someone who's worked in production and as a writer, is to figure out what changes, what gets added, that sort of thing. I think that they did the pacing on this particular section was really good and pretty funny. This is the section I did legitimately enjoy, especially when, though their interactions would vary, when the cadets were doing whatever they were doing, and then Keith would just follow up along behind. You didn't even need to see what transpired. You're like, okay, the same person's gonna get the whole thing over again. But it was completely funny. But it was also like a mystery because you were getting, and even blanking which one says it. I think it's Vince talks about like all the different people they've talked to, the repair shop and or the body shop and everything else. Like, where is this all going? And so we're piecing this together along with them, but none of that was dragging at all.
Yeah, it had some exposition, but it didn't get bogged down in it. I like the repetition. Cadets talk to somebody, Keith talks to that somebody. Cadets talk to somebody, Keith talks to that somebody. And this scene at the garage or warehouse is where they get the payoff. I really like the pacing here too.
Yeah, I thought it really worked because you thought he was still going to be that far behind them. But there he is. He's right there. Just in time.
Yep. And so I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit from the script here. And again, it's pretty much verbatim as to what's in the finished episode. But we're in a warehouse. It's nighttime, and we see Todd, and he says, so he's talking to a bunch of his buddies. He says, so then I told them to meet me at the kitchen entrance, and they bought it. And then the cadets show up. And the cadet are facing Todd and his buddies, and Todd's terrified. Said, let's get out of here. And Daniel, he's really sure of himself. He's thinking that the cadets have frightened Todd and his buddies away, and says, that's right, you better run. And then then the camera reveals that Keith is standing behind them with his Voltcom swords. So he shows up just after they do, but he's the one who scares them all away.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fun.
Yep.
And then Keith asks what the cadets were doing there. And before the cadets can, make up a reason why they're there or confess why they were really there, Keith explains it away for them and says, you flew here when Castle Control signaled that the Black Lion was missing. You disobeyed orders so you could come and help us out. A little misguided, but noble of you nonetheless. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a fight to join.
But he gets into Black Lion, and what happens?
Gets a few surprises of his own.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the Black Lion it's got hydraulics and neon runners. It's got flames painted or decal all over the sides. It is really decked out, and it even has a pair of fuzzy dice in the cockpit, and it's pretty awesome. The the Black Lion's shoulders in Voltron Force, all the lions, their shoulders have these black, they're elliptical, but from most angles they look from some angles you could think that they're circular. And part of tricking out or pimping out the Black Lion is they've got like these, like you see on some cars where the hubcaps have got these rotors on them, and they kind of spin independently of the tires. And there are some of those on Black Lion's shoulders, and it's just hilarious.
And he's got like fire striping all over him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you consider, that is one thing that does keep getting emphasized throughout the episode, is everybody's like telling Keith, largely it's Lance, but how straight-laced he is, how he doesn't know how to have fun. Lance is the main person who's pointing that out to him. So then you've been watching him told that the whole time through. And then all of a sudden he's confronted with a Black Lion that's all decked out like that. Like, okay, what will he do?
Yeah. And then he sits down, the fuzzy dice are hanging there, and he says, "This is so not cool." Oh, goodness. So
the whole time I'm thinking to myself, Black Lion, if he really wanted to, didn't have to put up with all this.
no,
He could have just ran off. But I think he really wanted it.
why not?
I think he wanted to get pimped out.
Who doesn't want to make over every now and then, I guess. So we cut back to the other lions, just surrounded by Dred's forces. He's got a ton of those limos and drool tanks and drool goons with laser machine guns and all that. Black Lion is there. He pops in, and they make quick work of the remaining vehicles. And the cadets arrive because they've had to walk, presumably. They reach the Leisure-Drome just as Boss Dred and his goons are being arrested by Dradin police. And a geek from Psycon pops up. He shows up on the scene, and he's surprised that the Leisure-Drome has been heavily damaged because he's been inside the whole time, and presumably no one at Psycon has had any idea that the place had been under attack. He gives extra passes to the cadets to go into Psycon. So the whole point of them trying to sneak into the hotel has been rendered obsolete. They now have their own way to get in. So Manset says he's going to rebuild because he's got a generous insurance policy. He must have looked at that paperwork very soon after his own statue was destroyed. But he seems happy with himself at this point, and the pilots are now wondering where the cadets are. So we're now in the Leisure-Drome Convention Center at Psycon, and Vince's Voltron documentary comes to an end, and this seems to be a portion of, or the ending of, the video that we saw back in the teaser. It's summed up with a 1980s Voltron style logo, which is awesome.
And I love that part.
Yes.
Yes, and it turns out it's a hit. All the people at Psycon are cheering and going crazy. And the fun part is that the Voltron Force pilots are trying to get into the convention center, but the same bouncer who had kept the cadets from getting into Psycon because they weren't on the list won't let the pilots in because they're not on the list. So the episode closes with the lions running down a street on Dradin. Keith is wearing sunglasses and smiling as the Black Lion bumps along. And by bumping, it's walking with a cool strut as if it's got hydraulics in it almost, sort of bouncing with each step. And some fun hip hop like music is playing, and off they go. And that's the end.
I can't remember the exact dialogue. This is the first line. I think it's Lance going, "Well, did anybody have fun today?" And that's when you see Keith like adjusting the shades and everything, going, "I did."
Yes. Yeah. And that's the episode. What do you think?
So I did want to go back to the beginning for just a quick second.
Sure.
When before we find Manset offering them the invitation to go to Dradin, Pidge just brings the previous episode and this episode together by saying that the Nexus is all fixed and Black is better than ever, right?
Right.
So they did do a transition from the previous episode to this one that quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. So
that
yeah,
nobody
the previous...
had that nagging question that, oh, they took Black Lion out and all this other stuff has just happened to it. It just got its Nexus fixed, and look what happened to it.
Right.
You know, but the idea is that the Nexus wasn't still broken and this stuff happened to it.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I think the previous episode was 5 Forged. And they were on Ariel, and the blacksmith showed up and repaired Black Lion's Nexus. It's a piece of the Nexus. So yeah, they're in a good place in a bit of a lull, and then this awesome craziness happens. So
yeah,
and that's it. So thoughts about the episode as a whole?
Well, one of the things that you didn't refer to, but specifically, I'll bring it up. What you did refer earlier, like the Ferris Bueller bit, that there were several homages to other types of films that were scattered through here. And if I knew some of those movies, I do know Ferris Bueller, but if I knew some of these movies, I might have gotten them. Like, I had to go online and research. For example, there's the exchange when they're headed to Dradin, and Lance is the one going, Dradin, baby, Dradin, which is where we get the title of the entire episode.
They used the title in the show.
Right. And then Hunk comes back with, you are so money. And Lance goes, I have no idea what you just said there, or something to that effect. So I had to Google the phrase, you are so money, to find out it was from Swingers. So there's probably a bunch of other references in there I don't know because I haven't seen that movie. It seems like that's something the writers may have been going for. So who knows what else they missed.
Yeah, the script does call out where just before Manset is captured by Boss Dredd, the Voltron, it seems that Manset and possibly the Voltron Force pilots are about to get into Manset's limo. And then Dredd's militarized limo shows up and smashes Manset's out of the way. It is so quick that if you blink, you'll miss it. But the script points out this is a reference to the Apex Twin video by Chris Cunningham, which I am not personally familiar with, but anyway, that apparently was a deliberate reference. And I don't know of any others that are called out specifically in the script. But yes, I agree. There definitely have got to be some references in there.
And there was a line that Keith said after he had gotten back in Black Lion, and then they finished off all of Dredd's tanks. He says, "Always bet on Black," and that wasn't in the original script either.
That's true.
Interesting, because
line.
that's something that line made total sense, because like the roulette wheel, I was like, okay, that seemed like an obvious first draft ad. So I'm surprised that that's a later draft ad.
And they're at a casino,
right?
So,
and so I didn't call out during the quick run through of the episode what the Syndicate actually was. Boss Dredd's group. Manset describes the Syndicate as a network of ex-military drools who defected from Planet Doom. And that's pretty much it. And Boss Dredd is their leader. So apparently they had enough of doing Lotor's bad stuff, or maybe maybe they'd been there as far back as when Zarkon was ruling. But in any case, they're on Dradin now and causing all kinds of craziness. So
as often as Lotor gets done in and brought back, it makes sense that some of them would lose their patience. Like, we can do this better. We're gonna do our own thing.
Yeah. Right. I was thinking the same exact thing. I was thinking during one of those times when he dies and he gets brought back by Hegarium, anybody on that planet could leave and he wouldn't even know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he probably can't tell any of them from any others of them anyway. I don't think that Lotor ever even called out Cossack by name in this entire show. I think Mayhawks was the only one who had any significant interaction with him in the show. So
I think you're right that it's Mayhawks that calls Cossack by name, because I remember watching that, not on first watch even, and went, that's supposed to be Cossack? Because there's the idea that there was a name recurring that we knew that wasn't out of the original set, but only out of the wet produced set
Right.
of the original show. I was like, they reused Cossack as a name?
Yep.
Yeah.
So there we are. Again, thoughts about the episode on the whole, good, bad, and different. What are your thoughts?
You had mentioned earlier that there's only 6 episodes left in this whole
Yeah.
show.
Yep.
And we just got the Nexus fixed. And then they had sort of like this one-off episode, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we do know that, like you said, Awesome Tron still plays a part in the upcoming episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also know that, Daniel gets this infection. That seems like they really threw those 6 episodes together really quick at the end there and made a lot of things happen. So I don't, when I look back on when I saw this for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really get a chance to view it like this. So in reviewing every episode one by one and knowing what happens at the end,
Mm-hmm.
it's really strange for me to say, oh my gosh, there's only 6 episodes left, and there's so much stuff that happens in those 6.
Yeah. I have to think. I mean, I'm looking back at the script, and so we have access to the 3rd draft with voiceover edits. And so the first draft was dated September 10th, 2010. So
Yeah.
several months before the first episode dropped, because it takes a long time to make a cartoon.
Yes.
And this particular draft with the voiceover edits is dated November 1st, 2010. So less than 2 months later, and still several months before the show dropped. So
Right.
I think it's extremely unlikely that the writing was on the wall as these episodes are being written, that there would be nothing beyond season 1. And this has got to be one of those bam, bam, bam. We're going to build up, build up, build up. We've got our climax and our cliffhanger. And, the audience is going to be wanting more. I can't imagine they wrote this to try to hurry a show into some kind of a satisfactory conclusion. I don't read it that way, even in hindsight. But what are your thoughts?
The closest I can come is if they had pitched it. Now, obviously, there's certain people that know the answer to this. Knowing what we just came out of, the seriousness arc of not as dark as where we're gonna go, but the serious arc of needing to fix Black Lion, and then knowing where we were gonna go. Did they have it paced a certain way, and then some set of executives say, "We need a light break in here before you go from here to here," and that would have lost you an entire episode of space? I'm conjecturing. I am only conjecturing.
Yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, one might think, well, wow, one whole episode out of a mere 26 doesn't really add anything to the overall story arc. But if you look back at Voltron Legendary Defender, they had their share of really wacky comedy episodes. They were usually interwoven with a serious B plot, but not always. I mean, you think back to Space Mall. That's one of the silliest of the stories, but juxtaposed with that A plot was the B plot of Shiro learning more about the history of the Black Lion and Zarkon and all that. And
Oh, you could say Garfle Warfle Snick might have been something was that really moving the plot along at all?
Definitely, that was the feud. Yeah. That was definitely an outlier. That was pretty much silliness start to finish. And the show had its moments, and Voltron Force was a lighter show, I would say, maybe lighter. I mean, Legendary Defender had its levity too. I don't feel like this was a lost slot that could have been used for something big. I know that this is not a universally loved episode, but I really dig it. I like that they went off in a different direction and gave us a bit of a breather, whether that was intentional or not, whether that was imposed by Nicktoons or Wep or Todd Garfield or whomever had that thought. I do like that we had a bit of a breather before the episodes that come. I don't know. I really enjoyed it.
I just will always remember this as the time that they played an homage to fan cosplay. That will always be ingrained in my memory with this episode.
Yeah.
I can definitely say by walking through it with you, my appreciation for it definitely has risen by getting me to analyze it. And to Greg's point, it is at least primarily an original story. I mean, we know that there were ultimately 4, I think. Yeah. A handful of episodes for V3D where it was primarily reuse with tiny bits of new content written around it.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're, like we were talking about things in here that might have, in this particular Voltron Force episode, that might have been budget saving for whatever reason, it's not like we were subjected to something as framing sequences around it's a ton of stock footage. Or even in the case of Vince's video, you pointed out there's a couple shots that had to be recreated that weren't pulled from the episodes they could have been pulled from. Those are all positive things. Very actually.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I honestly, it amazes me that they did go that extra mile and make those 2 new shots, and maybe more in that sequence that I just didn't catch. But I just remembered those weapons had only been used on Balto in that very distinctive environment, that city environment. Um, that they went that extra mile is pretty significant. I mean, it's clear they had to cut a couple of corners, like not showing the lions in that gigantic parking garage. But I think they went pretty full 9 yards on this, and I really dug it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Overall, I think it was a really good episode.
Yeah, a lot of fun. I kind of like when, and honestly, this is the Defender of the Universe part of me. I love Defender of the Universe. It is it's like a classic Star Trek. It's the onboarding for the OG Voltron fans. Love the show. However, the roe beast of the moment with the constant, oh, there's a roe beast, let's kick the crap out of it. Oh wait, we're getting our butts kicked, let's form Voltron. Oh wait, we're getting our butts kicked, form Blazing Sword, bam, we're done. It does get a little repetitive. So when you, yes, I love the show. I saw you shaking your head there, Mark.
Yeah,
I love the show. I love it. However, to have some deviations is really nice. Even in this show, which isn't as formulaic, to have that deviation is a nice change of pace.
It's
Hey,
not.
speaking of that, for deviations, the most we see Voltron in a completely formed bit is in Vince's video. They
Right.
never form Voltron during this episode when they're actually like in the action.
No, that was
Yeah.
a video. That doesn't count.
I know, that's
And
my point. Storyline wise, they
Yeah.
didn't form Voltron in this episode.
Right.
And as many of us have probably heard, when Bob Koppler or Jeremy Corey have described the making of Voltron Force, they kind of had to reintroduce the very basics of the show in each episode in some way, shape, or form. Now, they didn't do that all the time. The finale, I think, is a big deviation from that, because it was such a it wrapped up so much of what had come before. But in this particular episode, what do you get? You get the pilots, you get the cadets. They're distinct from one another. They're called out very clearly by being partitioned. Manset invites only the pilots. The cadets are in a separate thing. They got the lions. You know they formed Voltron because you see it in the video, and that's all they have to do to pay tribute to that. But the basics are still laid out very very nice and subtly. It's cool.
And we formed Awesometron.
We did indeed. And that will pay off again very soon.
And they screamed "Let's Voltron" before they did it.
And that's the best part of the whole episode. All right. Well, that was Dradin, baby. Dradin.
Yes. So we want you guys to know that we are looking forward to VoltCon 2023 coming up soon. We're all preparing panels for this, so we're going to be busy doing that up until then. So you probably won't get another episode of the podcast until after we get back from VoltCon.
Yep. So stay tuned. We'll be back on the same Volt time, the same Volt channel.
Yep, that's right. Okay, so thank you for joining us, Shannon.
Glad to be here with you and planning on seeing you at VoltCon.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we'll meet you at VoltCon, like the Shake Up song says.
That's right.
So we'll see you all next time on
Let's Voltron.
Let's go. All night. Let's go. All right. We